The abandoned firehouse stood at the end of Cherry Street, its brick façade darkened by decades of neglect. Once the pride of the small town of Millfield, it now served as a reminder of better days, its windows boarded up, its grand arched doorways sealed shut. Sarah Mitchell wiped sweat from her brow as she surveyed the dilapidated building, wondering if buying this crumbling landmark, the last affordable property she could find in town, was just another in a long line of desperate decisions that would only delay the inevitable admission of failure. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The August heat pressed down on the small town like a physical weight, shimmering above the cracked asphalt where children once gathered to watch the gleaming fire trucks emerge. Now those same bay doors were rusted shut, victims of 20 years of abandonment that had transformed the once proud Millfield Station No. into a neighborhood eyesore and the subject of countless failed redevelopment proposals. Sarah's weathered minivan sat nearby, stuffed with the last of her belongings. A few pieces of second-hand furniture, clothes packed in plastic bins, and toys her 8-year-old daughter Emma couldn't bear to part with. Even with everything she owned packed inside, the vehicle looked half-empty, a visual reminder of how much they'd already lost. At 36, Sarah had the determined eyes and premature worry lines of a woman who'd spent her life swimming against the current. A single mother with a teaching degree and mounting debt. She had inherited nothing but responsibility when her husband walked out 3 years earlier, leaving her with Emma, a stack of unpaid bills, and a mortgage they could no longer afford. For more than 2 years, they'd managed in their small suburban home, with Sarah working her teaching job during the day and waiting tables at night. But then the school district cuts had come, reducing her to part-time status. The waiting job couldn't cover the shortfall, and the foreclosure notices had begun arriving with merciless regularity. "You sure about this?" called out Rita Gonzalez, Sarah's closest friend since college. She stood by the U-Haul they'd rented to move the larger items, another expense they could ill afford. "This building hasn't been occupied since we were in high school." Sarah nodded grimly, unable to articulate the mix of shame and determination that had driven her to this decision. The truth was brutally simple. After the foreclosure, they had exactly 3 weeks before they would have been homeless. The real estate market in Millfield had exploded in recent years as wealthy city dwellers sought cheaper housing within commuting distance, pushing locals like Sarah out of the market entirely. "No choice, Rita," Sarah finally answered, her voice rough with emotion. "The city council was practically giving it away. They've been trying to offload it for years, and I was the only fool willing to take it on with all its problems. The commercial zoning means I can live and work here, start that art studio I've always talked about." What Sarah didn't say was that Emma's chronic asthma had been the final blow to their precarious finances. The specialist visits and medications had drained her emergency savings, and even with insurance, the costs kept mounting. The decision to buy the abandoned firehouse hadn't come easily. Built in 1932, the firehouse had served the community until 1998, when budget cuts forced consolidation with the main station across town. Sarah had vivid childhood memories of school trips to see the fire trucks and smiling firefighters. But after its closure, the building had passed through multiple owners with grand revitalization plans, all of which had failed due to the extensive renovations required to bring the structure up to modern building codes. "Let's get this done," Sarah said, climbing the crumbling concrete steps to unlock the padlock on the side door. The main truck bay doors were rusted shut and would need professional help to open, another expense to add to the growing list. Time was ticking, and every hour delayed was another hour of doubt she couldn't afford to entertain. The interior was as daunting as she remembered from her brief inspection before purchasing. The vast ground floor, once home to fire trucks and equipment, was a cavernous space of concrete and dust. Upstairs, The firefighters' living quarters consisted of a large dormitory-style room, a small kitchen, and basic bathroom facilities, all in various states of disrepair. The electricity worked barely, with ancient wiring that would need complete replacement. The plumbing was questionable at best. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Mom, can I see my room again?" Emma called, bouncing out of the minivan with the resilience only children possess. Despite everything they'd been through, Emma's spirit remained unbroken. Her long brown hair tied in a messy ponytail, she clutched her worn stuffed rabbit, a constant companion since her father's departure. Sarah forced a smile. "Sure, sweetie. Just be careful on the stairs. Remember, this is going to be a work in progress for a while." As Emma carefully navigated the stairs to explore what would become her bedroom, a small office off the main dormitory that had once belonged to the station captain, Sarah and Rita began unloading the essentials they'd need for their first night. Mattresses, bedding, a camping stove since the kitchen appliances were decades past their usable life. "The neighbors are staring," Rita muttered, nodding toward the houses across the street where curtains moved and silhouettes lingered in windows. Word travels fast in this town. Sarah had noticed the watchers too, felt the weight of their judgment. Once respected as a dedicated teacher at Millfield Elementary, she now sensed her status shifting to object of pity and gossip. The woman who lost everything and ended up in the abandoned firehouse. The single mother who couldn't maintain a proper home for her child. "Let them stare," Sarah said, lifting a box of kitchen supplies. "In 6 months, when I've turned this place into something special, they'll be lining up for art classes." The bravado in her voice didn't quite reach her heart. The reality of what she faced was overwhelming. Replacing wiring, fixing plumbing, installing proper heating and cooling, transforming the truck bay into a functional art studio where she could teach classes and sell artwork. Her savings, what little remained after the down payment, might cover materials for the most urgent repairs, but most of the work would have to come from her own hands, skills she'd have to learn as she went. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the grimy windows, they'd established a makeshift living area upstairs. 2 mattresses on the floor, a table fashioned from plywood and cinder blocks, and battery-powered lamps providing islands of light in the gathering darkness. The bathroom was functional, though the water ran rust-colored for several minutes before clearing. "I should get going," Rita said reluctantly, glancing at her watch. "Mark has dinner waiting, and I promised I wouldn't be too late." Sarah walked her friend to the door, grateful beyond words for the help, but acutely aware of how different their lives had become. Rita had married her college sweetheart, secured tenure at the local community college, and built the kind of stable life that now seemed like a distant dream to Sarah. "We'll be fine," Sarah assured her, answering the unspoken concern in Rita's eyes. "This is just temporary. A stepping stone." After Rita's departure, Sarah locked the door, the new deadbolt one of her first installations, and climbed the stairs to find Emma already in pajamas, arranging her small collection of books on a wooden crate beside her mattress. "I like it here, Mom," Emma said with surprising conviction. "It feels like an adventure." Sarah sat beside her daughter, brushing back a strand of hair from her forehead. "It is an adventure, sweetie. And you know what explorers need after a big day of adventure? Sleep." Once Emma had drifted off, Sarah crept back downstairs with a flashlight, determined to better assess what they'd gotten themselves into. The truck bay was massive, approximately 2,500 square feet of open space, with concrete floors and high ceilings. Perfect for an art studio if she could solve the heating, lighting, and access issues. The walls were solid brick, the foundation appeared sound despite some cracking. The building had good bones, as her father would have said. It just needed someone to care enough to restore it. As she swept her flashlight across the far wall, something caught her attention. Unlike the main bay doors at the front of the building, this was a smaller personnel door, partially concealed behind what appeared to be storage shelving that had been built against the wall. The door wasn't on any of the building plans she'd reviewed before purchasing. Curious, Sarah made her way across the empty bay, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. The shelving unit was bolted to the wall but showed signs of having been moved at some point. Scrape marks on the concrete floor and misaligned mounting brackets. Setting down her flashlight to provide ambient light, she examined the shelves more closely. They were empty now, but labels still clung to some of the shelves. Auxiliary equipment, specialized gear, historical archives. It was this last label that caught Sarah's interest. As a history minor in college, she'd always been fascinated by local heritage. Perhaps there were records about the Firehouse somewhere, documentation that might help with restoration or possibly even increase the property's historical value. The shelving unit was heavy but not immovable. With considerable effort, Sarah managed to slide it about a foot away from the wall, creating enough space to see that there was indeed a door behind it. A metal door with no visible handle, just a small, old-fashioned keyhole. A sense of excitement momentarily displaced her exhaustion. Hidden rooms were the stuff of renovation shows and treasure-hunting novels, not real life in Millfield. Yet here was a door that someone had deliberately concealed behind shelving, a door missing from the official building plans. Without a key, however, the discovery would have to wait until morning. Sarah made a mental note to check the jumble of old keys that had come with the property, a rusted ring of mysterious keys that the city clerk had handed over with a shrug, and a comment about lost knowledge of what most of them opened. Upstairs, she stretched out on her mattress beside Emma, listening to the unfamiliar creaks and sighs of their new home. Despite the day's challenges and the mountain of work ahead, Sarah felt a curious sense of possibility. They had a roof over their heads, walls around them, and for the first time in months, no immediate threat of losing it all. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Morning came with a harsh reminder of their circumstances. Cold water for washing. The water heater was yet another item needing replacement. Breakfast of granola bars and juice boxes. And the stares of neighbors watching Emma board the school bus from her new, unconventional address. "Remember, Rita will pick you up after school," Sarah reminded her daughter, straightening the collar of her shirt. "I've got meetings with the building inspector and the bank." Emma nodded solemnly. "Will the other kids make fun of me for living in a firehouse?" The question struck Sarah like a physical blow. Anyone who makes fun of you is missing out on how cool it is to live somewhere with so much history and character, she answered, mustering enthusiasm. "Besides, once we fix it up, it's going to be the most amazing house in town." After the bus departed, Sarah returned to her exploration, retrieving the ring of mysterious keys. There were 17 in total, ranging from modern deadbolt keys to ornate antique specimens that looked more decorative than functional. She tried each in the hidden door's keyhole, working methodically through the collection. On the 14th key, a tarnished brass piece with an unusual square bow, she felt the satisfying catch of tumblers aligning. With a grinding sound of metal on metal, the lock released. The door, however, remained stubbornly in place, apparently sealed shut by decades of disuse. Sarah retrieved a hammer from her meager tool collection and carefully tapped around the door's edges, hoping to break whatever seal had formed. After several minutes of persistent effort, she felt the door give slightly. Encouraged, she applied steady pressure while continuing to tap along the frame. With a sound like distant thunder, the old door finally surrendered, swinging inward with surprising smoothness once the initial resistance was overcome. The hinges, though dusty, showed no signs of rust, suggesting they had been well maintained or perhaps made of non-corrosive material. The beam of Sarah's flashlight revealed a small room, approximately 8 by 10 feet, with no windows and a concrete floor similar to the main bay. But unlike the empty bay, This room was far from bare. Metal shelving lined 3 walls from floor to ceiling, and on those shelves sat dozens of wooden boxes, their surfaces darkened with age but still intact. Each bore stenciled markings, partially visible in the flashlight beam, MFD Treasury, and what appeared to be inventory numbers. Between and around the boxes were leather-bound ledgers, their spines labeled with years spanning from 1932 to 1998, the entire operational life of Station No. 3. Sarah reached for the nearest box, her heart racing with curiosity. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, the contents shifting with a distinctive sound that immediately registered as valuable, the muted clink of metal objects moving against each other. She set the box on the floor and carefully lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in velvet lining that had somehow survived the decades intact, lay rows of coins, not ordinary pocket change, but gleaming gold and silver pieces that caught the flashlight beam and reflected it in brilliant flashes. Sarah lifted one with trembling fingers, feeling its substantial weight. It was a gold coin, larger than any modern currency, bearing the image of a woman in flowing robes, representing liberty and the date, 1924, a St. Gaudens double eagle, a $20 gold piece from the era before President Roosevelt recalled gold currency in 1933. Sarah had seen one once in a museum exhibition on American currency. Even with her limited numismatic knowledge, she recognized that such coins were valuable collector's items, worth far more than their face value or even their gold content. And this box contained dozens of them, arranged in neat rows. With increasing excitement, Sarah opened another box, finding more gold coins of various denominations and dates. A third box revealed silver dollars, including several with the distinctive peace dollar, designed from the 1920s and early 30s. Each piece was in remarkable condition, preserved by the controlled environment of the sealed room. The ledgers proved even more illuminating. Opening one from 1932, the year the station was built, Sarah found meticulous handwritten records documenting the establishment of what was referred to as the Firefighters Security Fund. The initial entry explained that during the depths of the Great Depression, when banks were failing across the country and public trust in financial institutions was at an all-time low, the firefighters of Millfield had established their own collective savings system. Each member contributed a portion of their salary, which was used to purchase gold and silver coins instead of relying on increasingly unstable paper currency. The fund was meant to provide security for their families in case of tragedy or economic collapse. As the Depression deepened and Roosevelt's gold recall went into effect, the firefighters had made the decision to maintain their fund in secret, believing they were protecting their families' futures. Subsequent ledgers documented the fund's growth through the decades. New firefighters were initiated into the secret upon gaining permanent positions, each adding to the collection through regular contributions. The final ledger, dated 1998, recorded the decision made when the station was decommissioned. The fund would remain in place, untouched, until some future crisis might necessitate its use for the good of the firefighters' descendants or the town itself. The last entry, written in a shaky hand that differed from the meticulous script of earlier records, read, "We seal this room and its contents, entrusting future generations with the wisdom to utilize this reserve when true need arises. May it serve as we intended, as protection against hardship and a foundation for renewal." Sarah sat back on her heels, her mind racing to process the implications of what she'd discovered. This wasn't just a few collectible coins. This was an organized, substantial reserve of precious metals maintained in secret for over 60 years. The value would be staggering, not just in terms of the metal content, but particularly for the numismatic worth of these well-preserved specimens. But who legally owned this treasure? The firefighters who had contributed to it. Their descendants? The city of Millfield? Or did it come with the building, now her property? These questions swirled through Sarah's mind as she carefully replaced the coins in their boxes and began documenting what she'd found, taking photos with her phone of representative samples and the most informative pages from the ledgers. One thing was clear: she needed legal advice before proceeding further. This discovery could transform her situation completely, but only if handled properly. The last thing she wanted was to become embroiled in ownership disputes or accusations of theft. With reluctance, Sarah carefully closed the hidden room, locking it securely. She would need to consult an attorney who specialized in property law and possibly historical artifacts. Rita's husband Mark was a lawyer, not in this specific field, but he might be able to recommend someone appropriate. Throughout her meeting with the building inspector that afternoon, who confirmed her worst fears about the extensive work needed to bring the firehouse up to code, Sarah found her thoughts continually returning to the hidden room and its glittering contents. The inspector's estimate for required repairs came to nearly triple her remaining savings, a devastating figure that would have crushed her spirit just hours earlier. Now, however, she felt a curious calm. If the treasure proved to be legally hers, or even partially hers, it could mean not just saving the firehouse, but transforming it into the home and business she had always dreamed of. If not, at least she might be able to leverage her discovery into some form of compensation or recognition that could improve their situation. As she stood in the empty truck bay after the inspector's departure, Sarah found herself studying the building with new eyes. This wasn't just a desperate last resort anymore. It was a place with history, with secrets, with unexpected potential. The firefighters who had walked these floors had created something meant to endure, to provide security in uncertain times. Perhaps, in some way she couldn't yet fully comprehend. Their foresight had reached across the decades to provide exactly that, for a struggling single mother and her daughter, security in their own time of need. With renewed determination, Sarah began clearing debris from what would become her art studio space. The mountain of work remained daunting, but now it felt less like a burden and more like an opportunity, a chance to honor the building's past while creating something new and valuable for the future. Emma arrived home with Rita later that afternoon, bubbling with stories about how her classmates had actually thought living in a firehouse was totally cool, a small victory that brightened Sarah's day immeasurably. As Emma chattered about her teacher's promise to bring the class for a tour once renovations were underway, Sarah caught Rita's questioning gaze. "You seem different," Rita observed when Emma had gone upstairs to arrange her few belongings. "This morning you looked like someone facing a firing squad. Now you're almost hopeful." Sarah hesitated, weighing her next words carefully. Rita was her closest friend, but the secret she'd discovered felt too significant, too potentially volatile to share widely just yet. "Let's just say I'm starting to see the potential in this place," she replied, offering a genuine smile that felt unfamiliar after months of forced optimism. "And I was wondering if Mark might recommend a good property attorney. There are some historical aspects of the building I need to understand better." Rita raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. "I'll ask him tonight. He knows everyone in the legal community around here." As darkness fell on their second night in the firehouse, Sarah sat at their makeshift table, sketching preliminary renovation plans by lamplight while Emma slept. The hidden room and its contents remained secured behind the metal door, but its promise illuminated every line she drew, not just repairs and basic functionality anymore, but true transformation. Windows where walls now stood. A mezzanine gallery overlooking the studio space. Proper living quarters with actual bedrooms and a modern kitchen. For the first time in years, Sarah allowed herself to dream beyond mere survival. Whatever came of her discovery, she had found something perhaps even more valuable than gold coins. She had found hope. And that, for tonight at least, was enough to keep the darkness at bay. Sarah awoke to the sound of rain drumming against the firehouse's metal roof, a rhythmic patter that echoed through the cavernous space. Dawn's gray light filtered through the grimy windows, casting the makeshift living quarters in a somber glow. She'd slept fitfully, her dreams filled with gleaming coins and anxious questions about what to do with her discovery. Emma was still sleeping soundly, her small form curled protectively around her stuffed rabbit. The sight brought both comfort and resolve to Sarah. Whatever happened with the hidden treasure, her primary obligation remained clear, providing security and stability for her daughter. She tiptoed to the bathroom, wincing as cold water hit her face. The building inspector's report sat on the makeshift counter, its detailed assessment of code violations and necessary repairs a daunting catalog of expenses she couldn't afford. Yet the knowledge of what lay hidden behind that metal door changed everything, transforming impossible obstacles into potential opportunities. By the time Emma awoke, Sarah had already made coffee using their camping stove and was sketching renovation plans at their makeshift table. Her teaching background had instilled a methodical approach to problems: break them down, prioritize, tackle them systematically. "Is it still raining?" Emma asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes as she padded across the floor in mismatched socks. Sarah nodded. "Perfect day for planning. How about cereal for breakfast while we figure out which space will be your art corner?" The morning passed quickly as they sketched and dreamed, Emma's imagination unfettered by practical constraints, as she suggested a firefighter's pole between floors and a rooftop garden. Sarah encouraged these flights of fancy while mentally cataloging the more realistic priorities: functional bathroom, safe wiring, proper heating. When Rita arrived mid-morning, she brought both welcome supplies, groceries, cleaning products, and a small space heater, and the contact information for Carter Montgomery, a property attorney her husband Mark had recommended. "Mark says he's the best in 3 counties for complicated property issues," Rita explained, helping Sarah arrange their few belongings more efficiently. Very discreet, which he emphasized might be important given the historical aspects you mentioned. Sarah caught the curiosity in her friend's voice, but maintained her reserve. Until she understood the legal implications of her discovery, sharing details seemed unwise. Instead, she steered the conversation toward immediate needs: the schedule for Emma's school transportation, plans for temporary shower facilities at Rita's house until their plumbing was reliable, and volunteers who might help with basic cleaning and repairs. Once Rita departed, Sarah made the call to Montgomery's office, securing an appointment for the following afternoon. The receptionist's polite inquiry about the nature of her consultation received only a vague response about property acquisition complexities, but it was enough to get her on the calendar. With Emma entertained by a drawing project, Sarah returned to the hidden room for more thorough documentation. This time, she brought a notebook, photographing each box of coins and transcribing key passages from the ledgers. The scale of the collection became clearer with this systematic approach. There appeared to be over 600 gold coins of various denominations and nearly 1,200 silver pieces, plus a small collection of rare currency notes preserved in plastic sleeves. One ledger, dated 1965 to 1970, included newspaper clippings about bank failures and economic downturns, alongside handwritten commentaries justifying the fund's continuation during more prosperous times. The firefighters had maintained their secret savings through decades of economic fluctuations, apparently vindicated in their caution by each new financial crisis. A photograph tucked into the 1976 ledger showed a group of solemn men in uniform standing before the firehouse, their faces bearing the dignified pride of public servants. On the back, someone had written, "Station 3 Brotherhood, Guardians of the Fund." These weren't just abstract historical figures. They were men who had lived and worked in this very building, who had walked the same floors Sarah now walked. As she carefully returned the materials to their places, Sarah noticed something she'd overlooked during her initial discovery. A small metal plaque mounted on the back wall of the hidden room, partially obscured by shadows. Directing her flashlight beam toward it, she read the inscription, "Established in darkness, maintained through vigilance, preserved for necessity. May those who discover understand the trust placed in their hands." The words resonated deeply, amplifying Sarah's sense that this wasn't just about finding valuable coins. She had stumbled upon something maintained with purpose and principle, across generations, a responsibility as much as an opportunity. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah conducted online research about numismatic values and the legal status of discovered valuables. The information was overwhelming and often contradictory. Historic coins like those in the collection could be worth anywhere from a few $1,000s each to hundreds of thousands for rare specimens in pristine condition. The legal precedents regarding found treasure varied wildly depending on circumstances, location, and how the property had changed hands. Sarah slept little that night, her mind cycling through possibilities, both promising and troubling. By morning, she had resolved to approach her attorney meeting with complete transparency, presenting everything she'd found and seeking guidance before taking any further action. The day passed in a blur of practical tasks, registering for utilities in her name, meeting with a contractor friend of Rita's who offered to help with electrical repairs at materials cost, and arranging for Emma's after-school care with a neighbor whose daughter was in the same class. Throughout these mundane activities, the secret knowledge hummed beneath the surface of Sarah's thoughts, both energizing and unsettling. Carter Montgomery's office occupied the second floor of Millfield's oldest commercial building, a Victorian structure that had housed the town's first bank in the 1890s. The irony of discussing a secret cache of gold and silver in a former bank wasn't lost on Sarah as she climbed the ornate staircase to keep her appointment. The attorney himself defied expectations, not the stern, gray-haired figure she had imagined, but a man perhaps a decade her senior, with an approachable manner and quick intelligence evident in his eyes. His office was a curious blend of modern efficiency and historical preservation, with state-of-the-art technology coexisting alongside original architectural features. "Ms. Mitchell," he greeted her, gesturing toward a comfortable chair across from his desk. "Mark Gonzalez speaks highly of you. He mentioned you've recently acquired the old Firehouse on Cherry Street and have encountered some interesting historical aspects." Sarah took a deep breath and began her account, starting with the purchase and discovery of the hidden door. As she described the contents of the secret room and showed photos on her phone, Montgomery's expression shifted from polite interest to focused attention. He asked precise questions about the building's purchase agreement, the transfer documents from the city, and whether any unusual clauses or reservations had been included. "And you've told no one else about this discovery?" he asked, making notes on a legal pad. "Just you," Sarah confirmed. "I wanted to understand the legal situation before proceeding." Montgomery nodded approvingly. "A wise approach. This is quite extraordinary, Miss Mitchell, based on your description and photos. We're talking about a collection potentially worth millions, particularly given the apparent condition and rarity of some specimens." The figure sent a jolt through Sarah, though she had suspected as much from her own research. Hearing it from a professional, however, made the reality of her situation suddenly concrete. "As for ownership," Montgomery continued, "that's complex. Normally, valuable items found on a property transfer with the property itself, unless specifically excluded in the sale agreement. You mentioned nothing about hidden assets was disclosed or excluded when you purchased from the city." Sarah shook her head. The disclosure only mentioned known structural issues and hazardous materials like asbestos in some insulation. Nothing about historical assets or a hidden room. "That works in your favor," Montgomery said. "However, this situation has unusual elements. The systematic nature of the collection, the documentation showing it was intentionally established and maintained by firefighters who served there, and the fact that it remained active until the station's closure creates potential claims from various parties. He outlined the possibilities. The city might claim the assets belonged to the fire department as an institution. Descendants of contributing firefighters might assert inheritance rights. The state could potentially invoke laws regarding abandoned property or historical artifacts. My preliminary assessment, Montgomery said after walking through various scenarios, is that you have a strong claim as the property owner, particularly since the collection was undisclosed during the sale. However, navigating this situation requires delicacy. He proposed a strategic approach. First, thorough documentation of everything in the collection with professional assessment of its value. Second, discreet research into the legal status of the fund and whether any provisions were ever made for its eventual disposition. Third, careful consideration of ethical dimensions alongside strictly legal ones. The court of public opinion matters here, Montgomery advised. Even with a strong legal claim, how this is handled could significantly impact your standing in the community. These firefighters were local heroes, and their descendants still live in this area. Sarah understood immediately. If she simply claimed the entire treasure as her own, regardless of legal justification, she risked being viewed as an opportunist, profiting from others' foresight and sacrifice. The moral complexity matched the legal complexity. What would you recommend as a first step? She asked. Professional documentation and valuation, done confidentially, Montgomery replied without hesitation. I have a contact, a numismatist who works with museums and high-value estates. Complete discretion, impeccable credentials. Once we know exactly what we're dealing with, we can develop the appropriate strategy. They scheduled a follow-up appointment for the following week, when Montgomery's expert could accompany them to examine the collection. As Sarah left his office, her mind was swimming with numbers and possibilities, hopes and concerns. The potential value of her discovery could transform her life and Emma's future, but the path forward was far from straightforward. That evening, as she scrubbed decades of grime from the Firehouse kitchen, Sarah found herself contemplating the generations of firefighters who had used this space. They had cooked meals here, shared stories, prepared for emergencies, and secretly contributed to their collective fund, all while serving the community. Their presence seemed to linger in the worn surfaces and practical layout of the space. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah opened it to find an elderly man standing on her threshold, his weathered face solemn beneath a cap that identified him as a veteran of the Korean War. "Evening, ma'am," he said, removing his cap. "Name's Walter Simmons. Heard someone finally bought the old station. Thought I'd stop by and introduce myself." Sarah invited him in, apologizing for the state of the place. Walter stepped inside, his eyes moving slowly around the truck bay as if reacquainting himself with a long-absent friend. "Served here for 32 years, he said quietly. "Joined in 66, stayed until they closed the doors in 98, was captain the last 12 years. Sarah's heart rate quickened. Here, unexpectedly on her doorstep, stood someone who likely knew about the hidden room and its contents, perhaps one of the last living members of the Brotherhood mentioned in the ledgers. "It must be strange seeing it like this," she offered, uncertain how to proceed. Walter nodded. "Buildings have lives of their own, in a way. This one saved a lot of lives in its time. Good to see someone giving it a second chance." He asked about her plans for the space, nodding approvingly at her idea for an art studio and community classes. As their conversation continued, Sarah found herself increasingly torn. This man had dedicated his life to public service and had likely contributed to the fund hidden behind the wall. Did she owe him transparency? Or was discretion still the wisest course until she understood the legal landscape better? "Mr. Simmons," she began carefully, As I've been cleaning and assessing the building, I've noticed some unusual features, storage areas and such that weren't on the plans. The structure seems to have secrets. She watched his face closely, looking for recognition or concern. Walter's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, awareness perhaps, or caution. "Old buildings often do," he replied, "especially ones with history. Sometimes those secrets are best discovered in their own time." The ambiguity of his response convinced Sarah he knew something, but also that he was deliberately avoiding direct acknowledgement. It seemed the code of silence surrounding the fund remained active, even decades later. Walter departed soon after, leaving Sarah with his phone number, in case you have questions about the old place, and a promise to stop by again. His visit left her both reassured and unsettled, reassured that the firefighters had indeed intended their fund to remain a protected secret, unsettled by the growing web of moral considerations surrounding her discovery. The next few days passed in a blur of practical progress. The electrical contractor began updating the most dangerous wiring, focusing on the living quarters. Sarah's former colleagues from the elementary school organized a weekend cleaning brigade, transforming the grimy interior with elbow grease and goodwill. Emma's adjustment to their new circumstances continued to surprise and inspire Sarah, her daughter's resilience and imagination turning each hardship into an adventure. Yet beneath this visible progress, the hidden room and its contents remained Sarah's constant preoccupation. Each night after Emma slept, Sarah would slip downstairs, unlock the metal door, and spend time with the ledgers, absorbing the history they contained. The firefighters' motivations became clearer with each reading, not greed or distrust, but a deep commitment to providing security for their families and community in uncertain times. A 1974 entry particularly struck her. "Today we initiated probationary firefighter Jenkins into the Brotherhood and the Fund. As always, the decision was unanimous. The commitment to serve must be matched by the commitment to preserve. Each coin we set aside represents not personal wealth, but collective security, insurance against futures we cannot predict but must prepare for." By the time her follow-up appointment with Montgomery arrived, Sarah had reached a personal conclusion about the ethical dimensions of her discovery, regardless of legal technicalities. Whatever the ultimate disposition of the treasure, it needed to honor the intentions of those who had created and maintained it. Montgomery arrived with Diana Levine, the numismatist he had recommended, a brisk, professional woman with specialized equipment for examining and documenting the coins. Together they entered the hidden room, Montgomery visibly impressed by the organized nature of the collection. Levine immediately focused on assessing its contents. For 3 hours they carefully examined and documented every box, ledger, and note. Levine worked methodically, photographing specimens, recording dates and mint marks, noting conditions, and making preliminary valuations. She operated largely in silence, occasionally murmuring technical observations that meant little to Sarah but seemed significant to Montgomery. When they finally emerged from the hidden room, Levine's professional reserve had given way to barely contained excitement. "This is extraordinary," she told them, reviewing her notes. "Not just for the monetary value, which is substantial, but for the historical significance. A complete, documented collection maintained in secret for over 60 years, with specimens in near-perfect condition." Her preliminary estimate of the collection's value exceeded $157 million, with several individual coins potentially worth over $1 million each due to their rarity and condition. The systematic documentation in the ledgers added historical value that would interest major museums and collectors beyond the intrinsic worth of the precious metals. "Ms. Mitchell," Montgomery said as they processed this information, "you have options to consider. Based on my review of your purchase agreement and relevant precedents, you have a strong legal claim to this discovery as the property owner. However, as we discussed, there are ethical dimensions worth considering. Sarah nodded, having already reached her own conclusions. I want to honor the firefighters' intentions. They created this fund for security, for their families, and potentially for the community. I don't believe they would want it to become a source of conflict or simply disappear into private collections. Montgomery seemed pleased with her perspective. There may be a way to balance various interests while securing your own future as well. I'd like to propose a framework for consideration. His suggestion was elegant in its approach. Establish a trust that would preserve the collection's historical integrity while benefiting multiple stakeholders. A significant portion would be designated for a permanent exhibition in the renovated Firehouse, honoring the firefighters' legacy. Another portion would provide educational scholarships for descendants of Millfield firefighters. A third portion would create a community emergency fund for Millfield residents facing crises, medical emergencies, natural disasters, or economic hardships. And yes, a portion would rightfully belong to Sarah as the property owner who discovered the treasure, providing financial security for her and Emma while funding the complete restoration of the historic Firehouse. This approach honors the original intent while creating contemporary relevance, Montgomery explained. It transforms a hidden treasure into a living legacy. Sarah felt immediate resonance with the proposal. It acknowledged her legal claim while extending the firefighters' original purpose into the present: security, community support, and preparation for uncertain futures. Before we proceed further, Montgomery cautioned, we should consider approaching key stakeholders discreetly, perhaps starting with your visitor, Walter Simmons. As a former captain, he might provide valuable perspective and potentially serve as a bridge to other firefighter families. Sarah agreed, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. The path forward remained complex, but now had direction and purpose beyond mere personal gain. The treasure would not simply be claimed, but transformed into something that honored its creators while serving present needs. As Montgomery and Levine packed their documentation materials, preparing to develop formal proposals, Sarah stood in the center of what would become her studio space. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like microscopic emissaries from the past. She had come to this building in desperation, seeking merely shelter at a price she could afford. Instead, she had found not just valuable coins but something more precious, a legacy of foresight, responsibility, and community care that spanned generations. Whatever happened next, Sarah knew her life and Emma's had been fundamentally altered, not just by the financial implications of her discovery, but by the connection to this place and the people who had once called it home. Walter Simmons sat at Sarah's makeshift table, his weathered hands cradling a mug of coffee as he studied the photographs spread before him. Outside, rain tapped against the firehouse windows, creating a gentle backdrop to this momentous conversation. Sarah had decided to approach the former fire captain directly, showing him selected images of the treasure and outlining Montgomery's proposed framework. "So you found it," Walter said finally, his voice quiet but not surprised. "Been wondering if anyone ever would after all these years." Sarah nodded. "I wanted to speak with you before proceeding further. This fund clearly meant something important to generations of firefighters. I want to honor that meaning, not just claim the value." Walter's eyes lifted from the photos to study her face, as if measuring her sincerity. Most people would have just quietly sold it all off. Wouldn't have blamed them, really. "That didn't feel right," Sarah replied simply. "The ledgers tell a story of community, of protection, of thinking beyond oneself. I may need this discovery financially, but I don't want to betray what it represents." A smile slowly transformed Walter's solemn expression. "Jacob Thomas, he was captain when I joined, used to say the fund wasn't about the money itself. It was about what money represents: security, preparation, responsibility to others." Sounds like you understood that without being told. Over the next hour, Walter shared the oral history that complemented the written records, how each Firefighter was evaluated not just for professional competence but for character and discretion before being initiated into the Brotherhood. How they debated using portions of the fund during various community crises, but always decided to preserve it for some future greater need. How they had sealed the room when the station closed, trusting that someday the right person would discover their legacy. There were 19 of us left when they closed Station 3, Walter explained. We made a pact. The fund stays untouched unless every surviving member agrees it's needed. Over the years, we've lost 14. Only 5 of us remain, all in our 70s and 80s now. Never could agree on the right time or purpose to reveal it. His expression grew thoughtful as he considered Montgomery's proposed framework. This trust idea, it honors what we intended, but gives it modern purpose. The exhibition preserves our story. The scholarships support future generations. The emergency fund serves the community in crisis. He nodded slowly. I believe I could bring the others around to this approach. Sarah felt relief wash through her. Having Walter's support would be crucial for both practical implementation and community acceptance. Would you be willing to help me connect with the remaining Brotherhood members? And perhaps with families of those who have passed? I would, Walter agreed. But there's something you should know first. The city manager at the time Station 3 closed, Bill Hargrove, he knew about the fund. Not the details or the location, but that something valuable was hidden in the building. That's why none of the redevelopment plans ever went through. He'd find reasons to block them, expecting developers to discover the treasure and claim it. This revelation added a new complication. If a former city official had known about the fund, even in general terms, it could strengthen potential claims by the city government. Does the current administration know? Sarah asked. Walter shook his head. Bill retired years ago, moved to Florida. Never told his successor as far as I know. But it's something to consider in your legal strategy. They agreed that Walter would arrange a private meeting with the surviving Brotherhood members in 3 days' time. In the meantime, Sarah would work with Montgomery to refine the trust proposal and prepare for potential negotiations with the city. After Walter left, Sarah found herself drawn once again to the hidden room. Sitting among the carefully preserved boxes, she imagined the firefighters gathering here over the decades, each contributing their small share to a collective vision that extended beyond their individual lifespans. In an era of instant gratification and short-term thinking, they had maintained the discipline to build something meaningful over generations. Their example strengthened her resolve to handle this discovery with the care and foresight it deserved. The meeting with the surviving Brotherhood members took place in the Firehouse's truck bay, a symbolic choice that wasn't lost on Sarah. The 5 elderly men moved through the space with reverent familiarity, touching walls and fixtures as if greeting old friends. They ranged in age from 72 to 86, their bodies showing the toll of decades of physically demanding service. But their eyes remained sharp and evaluative as they sized up the woman who had discovered their secret. Montgomery presented the trust proposal with professional precision, but it was Sarah who captured their attention when she spoke about her personal response to the discovery. When I bought this building, I was desperate, she told them frankly. A single mother with a foreclosed home and mounting debts, looking for any shelter I could afford. Finding the hidden room could have seemed like winning the lottery, a stroke of luck that solved all my problems. She gestured around the cavernous space. But the more I learned about what you built here, not just this building, but the Brotherhood and the fund, the more I realized this discovery carries responsibility with it. You created something meant to provide security and support across generations. I want to honor that intention while giving it new purpose for today's needs. By meeting's end, all 5 men had endorsed the framework, with several suggesting refinements that enhanced its alignment with their original vision. Harold Jenkins, at 86, the oldest surviving member, summarized their collective sentiment, We never knew exactly what form our legacy would take. We just knew we were building something that would matter when the right time came. Seems like both the right person and the right time have found our treasure. The path forward gained clarity and momentum in the days that followed. Montgomery formed a team of specialized attorneys to structure the trust legally. Levine completed a comprehensive valuation of the collection, confirming its worth at approximately $157 million. Walter and his Brotherhood colleagues began reaching out to families of deceased members, preparing them for the public announcement. Sarah, meanwhile, found herself unexpectedly thrust into a role for which nothing had prepared her: steward of a multi-million-dollar legacy with potential to transform her community. The responsibility was daunting, but she approached it with the same methodical determination that had guided her teaching career and her parenting, learning what she needed to know, seeking expert advice when necessary, and keeping focused on core principles rather than getting lost in details. Emma, with a child's adaptability, incorporated their changing circumstances into her worldview without fanfare. When Sarah tentatively explained that their financial situation would be improving significantly, Emma's primary question was whether they could get a dog now that they had space for one. "And can we keep the firefighter pole if we find it?" she added hopefully, referring to her ongoing conviction that the station must have had a pole despite Sarah's explanations about the building's single-story design. This innocent question sparked an idea that Sarah brought to her next meeting with Montgomery and the Brotherhood representatives. What if the trust doesn't just preserve the collection as a static exhibition? She proposed. What if we use a portion to actually restore the firehouse to its original function as a community space? A working museum where children can learn about firefighting history, emergency preparedness, and the value of community service? The concept resonated powerfully with the former firefighters. They envisioned interactive exhibits where visitors could try on gear, learn fire safety, and understand the evolution of emergency services. The upper floor could still become Sarah's residence and art studio, while the main bay would serve this public educational purpose. "We could call it the Brotherhood Museum of Service and Security," Walter suggested, the others nodding their agreement. Teaching future generations about both the visible service of firefighting and the invisible security of financial preparedness. As planning progressed, the question of how to approach the city government became increasingly pressing. Montgomery advised a proactive strategy, presenting the discovery and proposed trust as a positive development for the community rather than waiting for potential claims to emerge. "We go in with a complete, community-oriented plan that acknowledges all stakeholders," he explained. "The city gets the prestige of a unique historical museum, increased tourism, and a revitalized property on its tax rolls. They'd have representation on the trust board, but not control. It's a better outcome than years of costly litigation with uncertain results." Sarah scheduled a meeting with Mayor Eleanor Chun, a pragmatic second-term official known for her focus on economic development. Montgomery would accompany her, along with Walter representing the Brotherhood and Diana Levine, to address questions about the collection's value and significance. The morning of this crucial meeting, Sarah stood in the firehouse bay, watching dawn light filter through the high windows. In just weeks, her life had transformed from desperate survival to possibility and purpose. Yet beneath the excitement lay a foundation of responsibility that kept her grounded. "Mom, are you nervous?" Emma asked, appearing beside her in pajamas decorated with cartoon Dalmatians, a recent gift from Walter, who was rapidly assuming a grandfather-like role in their lives. Sarah smiled, kneeling to her daughter's level. "A little. Big meetings are always a bit scary." Emma nodded with the seriousness of a child who believes adults always know what they're doing. "You'll do great. You're helping the firefighter ghosts tell their story." "Firefighter ghosts?" Sarah repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's what I call the men in the old photos," Emma explained. "They lived here a long time ago, but they're still watching over us. Like ghosts, but the good kind. The simple childhood perspective contained a profound truth that settled Sarah's nerves. She wasn't facing this meeting alone. She carried with her the legacy of generations of public servants who had built something meant to endure beyond their individual lives. Mayor Chun received them in her office at City Hall, her professional demeanor masking any reaction to the extraordinary story Montgomery presented. She listened without interruption as he outlined the discovery, the historical background, and the proposed trust framework. "Let me be sure I understand correctly," she said when he finished. "You discovered approximately $157 million in historical gold and silver coins, hidden in a municipal building the city sold you for $175,000, and instead of simply claiming this as your property, you're proposing a trust that preserves the collection, honors the firefighters who created it, and serves the community through various programs." Sarah nodded. The treasure wasn't created by one person for personal gain. It shouldn't be claimed by one person for personal gain either. The trust honors the original intent while adapting it to present needs. Mayor Chun's gaze shifted to Walter. "You represent the firefighters who maintained this fund. You support this approach?" "Wholeheartedly," Walter confirmed. "Ms. Mitchell could have kept this discovery quiet, and no one would have been the wiser. Instead, she chose to honor the spirit in which the fund was created. The Brotherhood unanimously supports her vision." Levine added expert perspective on the collection's historical significance, emphasizing how the proposed museum would make Millfield a destination for numismatic scholars and history enthusiasts. After considering all perspectives, Mayor Chun's practical nature asserted itself. "This presents an unusual opportunity for our community. However, the city has a responsibility to ensure proper handling of assets potentially connected to municipal operations." She proposed a modified framework. The city would waive any potential claims to the treasure in exchange for permanent representation on the trust board and a commitment to keeping the museum in Millfield for at least 50 years. Additionally, a portion of admission fees would support the current fire department's equipment needs. "This creates a connection between past and present emergency services," she explained. "It also gives the city reasonable oversight without controlling the trust's operations." Montgomery and Sarah exchanged glances, both recognizing that this reasonable compromise avoided potentially years of legal battles. With the city's support rather than opposition, the trust could move forward immediately. "We'd be open to those modifications," Sarah agreed. "Our goal has always been to honor the past while serving the present community." The meeting concluded with handshakes and a scheduled press conference for the following week. As they left City Hall, Walter placed a weathered hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You did right by us," he said simply. "Not just the Brotherhood, but the whole tradition we stood for. Service above self." The transformation of the Firehouse began in earnest once the legal framework was established. With a portion of the trust funds allocated for restoration, Sarah could hire specialized contractors to preserve historical elements while updating systems to modern standards. The truck bay became a carefully designed exhibition space with interactive displays, telling both the story of firefighting in Millfield and the unique history of the Brotherhood's secret fund. The hidden room itself was preserved exactly as discovered, transformed into the centerpiece of the museum with a viewing area that allowed visitors to see the original boxes and ledgers in their historical context. Selected coins were displayed in specialized cases, while the majority of the collection was secured in museum-quality storage, with rotating exhibits planned to highlight different aspects of numismatic and local history. Upstairs, the former dormitory became a comfortable residence for Sarah and Emma, with an adjoining studio space where Sarah could teach art classes and create her own work. The restoration honored the building's original character while adapting it to new purposes, Much like the trust itself, honored the fund's original intent while giving it contemporary relevance. Throughout the process, Sarah found herself growing into her unexpected role. The media attention following the public announcement had initially been overwhelming. Local stories quickly spreading to national news as the unusual discovery and its handling captured public imagination. There were interview requests, documentary proposals, even suggestions for books and films about the Brotherhood and their 60-year secret. Rather than being swept away by this attention, Sarah remained focused on the core values that had guided her response from the beginning. She redirected media interest toward the educational aspects of the museum, the scholarships for firefighters' descendants, and the community emergency fund that had already helped 3 Millfield families facing medical crises. Emma, meanwhile, thrived in their new circumstances. Her asthma improved with proper medication now easily afforded, and she developed close relationships with the Brotherhood grandfathers, who frequently visited the Firehouse to share stories and monitor the restoration progress. Her school performance soared as financial stress disappeared from their home, replaced by a sense of purpose and possibility. 6 months after discovering the hidden room, Sarah stood at the entrance to the newly completed Brotherhood Museum of Service and Security, preparing for its grand opening. The restored firehouse gleamed in the spring sunshine, its brick facade cleaned and repointed, its grand arched doorways once again open to the community. Inside, interactive exhibits engaged visitors of all ages in the dual history of firefighting service and financial foresight. A restored vintage fire truck occupied the center of the main floor, surrounded by displays explaining emergency response evolution from the 1930s to the present. The hidden treasure room had been preserved behind glass, allowing visitors to see exactly what Sarah had discovered that August day. The upper floor now housed not only Sarah and Emma's comfortable living quarters, but also the Spark Studio, where Sarah taught art classes to children and adults. The name honored both the firefighting heritage and her belief that creativity, like emergency service, required both discipline and inspiration. As visitors began arriving for the opening ceremony, Sarah found a quiet moment with Walter and his Brotherhood, colleagues near the memorial wall listing all 103 firefighters who had served at Station 3 during its operational years. "Did you ever imagine this outcome when you sealed that room in 1998? She asked them. Harold Jenkins, the eldest at 86, shook his head with a smile. "We couldn't have predicted the specifics, but we believed in preparing for unknown futures, in creating security that would outlast us. In that sense, this is exactly what we imagined, our legacy serving needs we couldn't foresee." Mayor Chun approached, interrupting their conversation with news that the governor had arrived for the ribbon cutting. As Sarah moved to fulfill her duties as host, she caught sight of Emma leading a group of classmates through the children's area, proudly explaining the equipment displays with the confidence of someone who belonged completely in this space. The contrast with their arrival just 6 months earlier couldn't have been more profound. Then, they had been desperate refugees from financial collapse, ridiculed for moving into an abandoned building that no one else wanted. Now they stood at the center of a community treasure, not just because of the gold and silver discovered, but because of how that discovery had been transformed into shared purpose and possibility. Sarah had come to understand that the true value of the Brotherhood's fund wasn't measured primarily in dollars, despite its staggering financial worth. Its true significance lay in the example it provided, an example of foresight that extended beyond immediate self-interest, of discipline maintained across decades, of responsibility to future generations not yet born when the first coins were set aside. As she cut the ribbon officially opening the museum, flashbulbs capturing the moment for tomorrow's newspapers, Sarah felt the weight of that example resting comfortably on her shoulders. The Brotherhood had entrusted their legacy to future hands, believing someone would eventually discover their treasure and understand its purpose. In accepting that trust, She had found not just financial security, but meaningful work. Not just a house, but a home with history and purpose. The abandoned firehouse, once a symbol of municipal neglect and personal desperation, now stood renewed, not just in its physical restoration, but in its renewed purpose serving the community. Like the treasure it had concealed, the building had required the right person at the right time to reveal its full potential. As visitors streamed through the doors to explore the museum, Sarah caught Walter's eye across the crowd. The elderly firefighter gave her a subtle nod that conveyed more than words could express. Acknowledgement of a torch successfully passed, a legacy preserved and renewed, a trust honored. The journey from desperate mother to steward of history had been unexpected and transformative. Yet Sarah recognized that her response to the discovery had been guided by values she had always held: responsibility, integrity, community, and faith in possibility, even in difficult circumstances. The treasure had not changed who she was. It had simply given her greater capacity to express those values in the world. And perhaps that was the final lesson of the Brotherhood's extraordinary fund. That true security comes not from gold and silver locked away in hidden rooms, but from the character and choices that guide how we use whatever resources we have, whether abundant or scarce. The firefighters had understood this, building their fund not from excess, but from disciplined sharing of limited resources, motivated by care for others rather than personal gain. In following their example, Sarah had transformed not just an abandoned building and a hidden treasure, but the story of her own life, from victim of circumstances to author of possibilities, from desperate survival to purposeful service. As Emma rejoined her, slipping a small hand into hers, Sarah squeezed it gently, a silent promise to preserve and pass on not just their improved circumstances, but the values that had made that improvement meaningful. The true inheritance worth protecting wasn't counted in coins, but in character, in the capacity to face uncertainty with courage, and to transform discovery into legacy. 5 years had passed since Sarah Mitchell had first unlocked the rusted side door of the abandoned Millfield Fire Station No. 3 on this bright autumn morning. As golden light streamed through the restored arched windows of what was now her art studio, that desperate day seemed to belong to another lifetime entirely. The Brotherhood Museum of Service and Security had evolved from a novel local attraction to a nationally recognized institution, drawing visitors from across the country to learn about the extraordinary 60-year secret maintained by generations of firefighters. The educational programs had expanded beyond the original vision, now including financial literacy workshops inspired by the Brotherhood's disciplined approach to security and preparedness. Sarah set down her paintbrush, stepping back to evaluate her latest work, a large canvas capturing the moment of discovery, the hidden door revealed behind decades of dust and secrecy. The painting was part of a new series commemorating the 5th anniversary of the museum's opening, each canvas depicting a pivotal moment in the journey from desperation to transformation. "Mom, the school buses are here," Emma called from downstairs. At 13, she had grown into a confident young woman with her mother's determination and a unique perspective shaped by their extraordinary journey. No longer the bewildered child clutching a stuffed rabbit in an abandoned building. She now served as the museum's youngest docent, particularly adept at explaining complex concepts of financial security to visiting children. Sarah glanced at her watch, 9:15 a.m., right on schedule. Today's program would bring 5 elementary school classes for Brotherhood Day, an annual event where students learned about community service, emergency preparedness, and the power of collective action for long-term security. The children would rotate through interactive stations, create art projects about community heroes, and meet with current and retired firefighters, including several of the surviving Brotherhood members. As Sarah descended the spiral staircase that connected her private studio to the public museum space, she paused to appreciate how seamlessly the building's past and present had been integrated. The original brass fire poles, discovered during renovation behind false walls, now stood as sculptural elements linking the upper and lower floors. Historic equipment shared space with interactive digital displays explaining firefighting evolution. The hidden treasure room remained the heart of the exhibition, preserved exactly as she had discovered it, but now protected behind museum-quality glass. The main floor buzzed with the organized chaos of children being divided into activity groups. Emma efficiently directed students toward their first stations, her volunteer badge gleaming on her emerald green sweater. Rita Gonzalez, now the museum's education director after retiring from the community college, coordinated the adult volunteers with practiced ease. "Morning, Sarah," Walter Simmons called from his customary spot near the vintage fire truck display. At 80, he remained the most active of the surviving Brotherhood members, serving as board president and unofficial museum historian. His weathered face had become the institution's most recognizable image, featured in documentaries and educational materials about the extraordinary fund and its discovery. Sarah joined him, noticing how he straightened almost imperceptibly at her approach, military bearing reasserting itself despite his years. "How's our special project coming along?" he asked quietly, nodding toward the museum's newest wing, still under construction behind temporary barriers. "On schedule for the anniversary gala," Sarah confirmed. "The archival research is complete, and the exhibition design team presented final plans yesterday." The special project represented the museum's most ambitious expansion yet, the National Brotherhood Initiative, documenting similar firefighter security funds, discovered in 11 other cities across the country. Following Millfield's famous example, the discovery of Millfield's treasure had prompted former firefighters elsewhere to reveal their own long-maintained secret funds, creating a nationwide conversation about community resilience and intergenerational planning. Not all had been as substantial as Millfield's $157 million cash, but each told a similar story of service members quietly creating security through collective discipline and foresight. The new wing would connect these narratives, demonstrating how the ethos of preparation and community support had manifested independently across different regions and generations. "Carter's bringing the governor through at 11, Walter reminded her, referring to Carter Montgomery, who had transitioned from Sarah's attorney to the museum's legal counsel and a key strategic advisor. His guidance had been instrumental in navigating the complex negotiations that followed similar discoveries in other communities. Sarah nodded, mentally reviewing the talking points for this important visit. State funding for the educational programs had significantly expanded the museum's outreach capabilities, allowing them to bring the Brotherhood's lessons to underserved schools throughout the region. As the morning progressed, Sarah moved to the museum spaces, observing the children's engagement with various activities. At the financial literacy station, students learned about compound interest and long-term planning through a game that simulated the Brotherhood's discipline-saving approach. In the art room, they created thank you cards for current emergency responders. The History Center engaged them with interactive timelines, showing how community needs and responses had evolved over decades. Near the historical equipment display, Sarah overheard a young boy ask Harold Jenkins, now 91 and the oldest surviving Brotherhood member, a question that stopped her in her tracks. "Were you scared the treasure would be found by someone bad?" the child asked, his expression serious beneath a paper firefighter hat. Harold considered the question with the thoughtful respect he accorded all children's inquiries. "We weren't scared," he answered finally. "We were hopeful. We believed the right person would find it when it was truly needed. And we were right." His gaze met Sarah's across the display, conveying the depth of meaning behind his simple words. In the 5 years since the discovery, their relationship had evolved from cautious cooperation to profound mutual respect. The Brotherhood members had embraced her not as an accidental beneficiary of their foresight, but as the essential final link in their chain of stewardship, the one who had transformed hidden potential into living legacy. At 11 precisely, Carter Montgomery arrived with Governor Eliza Richardson and a small entourage of staff and security. The governor, known for her focus on economic resilience and community development, had taken a personal interest in the Brotherhood model as a template for grassroots security initiatives. "Ms. Mitchell," the governor greeted her warmly. "The museum continues to impress. I understand you're documenting similar funds discovered across the country?" Sarah guided the official party toward the construction area, explaining the National Brotherhood Initiative, while staff discreetly managed the school groups to maintain their educational experience undisturbed. "We've confirmed 11 comparable funds maintained by firefighters in cities from Boston to San Francisco. None remain secret quite as long as Millfield's, but all share the core philosophy of collective discipline for future security." The governor nodded approvingly. This approach resonates powerfully in today's economic climate. People are hungry for models of community resilience that don't rely solely on government intervention or individual wealth. Behind the construction barriers, Sarah revealed the preliminary exhibition designs, explaining how the expanded museum would document both the historical phenomenon and its contemporary applications. The Brotherhood's approach is being adapted for modern community funds focusing on disaster preparedness, educational endowments, and affordable housing initiatives. "And the scholarship program?" the governor inquired, referring to the educational trust established with a portion of the treasure to support descendants of Millfield firefighters. 27 students currently receiving full college funding, Carter reported proudly. The first graduates are already returning to public service roles, 3 as firefighters, 2 in emergency management, 4 in education. As the tour continued, Sarah noticed Emma leading her group of 4th graders through the treasure room exhibit, her clear voice carrying as she explained the discovery. "My mom didn't just find gold and silver," she told the wide-eyed children. "She found a promise made by people who never met us, but cared about our future anyway. That's what real treasure is, caring about tomorrow's people today." The simple wisdom in her daughter's words brought unexpected emotion to Sarah's throat. Emma had absorbed the deeper lessons of their journey, understanding that the Brotherhood's true legacy transcended monetary value. Following the governor's departure, the day flowed into afternoon activities, culminating in the Junior Brotherhood ceremony, where each child received a special coin, reproductions of the historic pieces, specially minted for the museum, symbolizing their commitment to community service and preparedness. As the school buses departed and staff began the daily closing procedures, Sarah retreated to her office overlooking the main exhibition hall. The space reflected her dual roles as both museum director and working artist, professional organization, blending with creative inspiration. Awards and recognition shared wall space with sketches and color studies. Behind her desk hung the museum's most treasured document, the original Brotherhood Oath. Preserved under UV protective glass, its final line highlighted, "We stand guardian not merely of lives and property today, but of security and possibility for generations yet unborn." A knock at the door preceded Rita's entrance. "Quarterly reports," she announced, placing a folder on Sarah's desk. The Community Emergency Fund provided assistance to 17 families. This quarter, mainly medical emergencies and housing stabilization. This aspect of the Brotherhood legacy had perhaps the most immediate impact, the portion of the treasure allocated to help Millfield residents facing personal crises. Structured to provide assistance while preserving dignity and fostering resilience, the fund had become a model studied by social service organizations nationwide. "The Martinez family sent this," Rita added, placing a handwritten card beside the folder. "Their daughter's surgery was successful." Sarah opened the card, reading the heartfelt message from parents whose child's life-saving procedure had been made possible through emergency fund support. These tangible outcomes, a child healed, a family kept in their home during job loss, an elder receiving necessary care, represented the Brotherhood's vision made manifest in individual lives. "You should head home," Rita suggested, noting the late hour. "Emma's already upstairs feeding that ridiculous dog." Sarah smiled, thinking of Sparky, the massive Bernese mountain dog that had joined their family 3 years ago, Emma's first request once they were settled in their renovated living quarters. Named for the fire safety mascot, he had become the unofficial museum greeter, his gentle temperament perfect for calming anxious children during their first encounters with the imposing building. Gathering her materials for the evening, Sarah reflected on the transformation of her life over these 5 years. The desperate single mother facing homelessness had become a respected community leader, her artistic talents now supported by financial security that allowed full expression. Emma had blossomed in an environment rich with purpose and possibility, surrounded by surrogate grandparents from the Brotherhood who delighted in sharing their wisdom and stories. Yet Sarah remained profoundly aware that their personal transformation represented only one facet of the Brotherhood's legacy. The treasure's greatest impact lay in its demonstration of what became possible when people committed to collective well-being over individual gain, when present sacrifices were made in service to future possibilities. As she climbed the spiral staircase to their private quarters, Sarah paused halfway up, looking back over the museum space, now quieted for the evening.